working? Try again. Hello everyone, this one's working. I think we can share one between three, that's fine. We have 25 minutes before lunch, so we'll keep this quick. I wanted to start by thanking you very much for your presentations. It was really a useful morning, and thanks for coming back up for the panel discussion. I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask, but I'm going to come to audience questions very quickly, so please have some questions ready. I wanted to link our discussion back to yesterday. So yesterday we were discussing improvements in the monitoring and the verification. And I was wondering whether, from the investor's point of view, whether these improvements are always helpful. So we can all, as scientists, we can always make our science better. We can always improve our verification. And I wonder whether that, for an investor, whether that seems as always a benefit, or whether there seems like there's more uncertainty because of the changing standards. So one thing I thought, a great point yesterday, was that we might be moving towards the possibility of continuous satellite monitoring, where everyone can just openly look up the carbon of any site. We're not there yet, but we may get there. Would this type of thing be helpful? And in general, are these advances helping get more finance into the market?
Yeah, so I think that to increase investor confidence in MRV, of course, the improvement of the technical solutions is key. And you know, if we were able to see a dashboard with live data on what is happening in those ecosystems, I mean, that would be absolutely brilliant. And what's important to understand, I think, is that there's two things to tackle here. One is the technical robustness. And the other one is the perception of credibility. And so on the technical robustness, we talk a lot about using, applying technical rigor to the projects and to make sure that standards are pre-reviewed, that independent verification bodies are used, that investors need to understand also uncertainty. So when we talk about error margins, confidence intervals, finance people love analyzing risk. And so the more data that a project can give them that is verifiable, measurable, traceable, the easier it is for them to trust that data or to form an opinion around it. The second point is involving scientists working with experts, reputable universities, I think also can help improve that kind of confidence. And then providing that open data access. But one thing I want to mention is there is a language barrier here. A finance person doesn't understand the details, the nuances in the MRV or even the blue carbon science. And so it comes down to the project to be able to translate those frameworks into plain language, easily understandable executive summaries that these kind of investors can look at quickly capture and understand what is the level of risk that I'm dealing with here. And then the last is investors, many of them don't have that in-house capacity to even assess what does it mean that they are seeing. So they are looking for proxies whereby they can assess quality of a project. And so it's important to align with emerging in high integrity framework like the core carbon principles, because for an investor, it's like checkbox. Okay, they have that label, somebody verify them, I can trust it.
I'm going to answer in Spanish. Bueno, poco que agregar.
Very little to add in regards to, okay, let's see. I can not speak from the perspective of an investor or maybe a financier, but something that we see, and it's not only applicable for these investment related to the blue carbon ecosystems, is that identifying and prioritizing the investments in the way that is shown in the framework that it was presented previously on my presentation, I think it is very important for this to be based on evidence, because it is important as the private sector, multilateral bank, and commercial banks, and in general, all the kinds of potential financing want to know what is the real impact of the investments, every dollar that they are putting into the projects, or what is the impact. So, and not only in terms of the climatic impact, mitigation, and adaptation, and resiliency, but also what is the impact of, in terms of social impact of this investment, and economical as well for this. So I think it is important, once again, on this line of thought, to consider that is multidimensional. It's not the data and the information can help us to provide a kind of sense, or maybe justify what is the impact of the investment in these areas and many others as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got questions written down, but maybe I'll just see if there's questions in the audience at this point. Does anyone have any questions to ask? Yes? Okay, there's quite a few.
Thank you. Tying together a lot of really useful things that I've heard yesterday and today, we hear that a lot of blue carbon projects are really small and complicated. We hear also that there's a need for great investment instruments like are being developed, but also want to move quickly. And we hear also that consultation with communities takes time, and so there's a challenge there. And if we want to scale up, rather than look at small projects, how do we do that? And so one thing occurs, which I'd like to offer, is that there needs to be more early investment supporting countries in assessing what their blue carbon opportunities are and really getting into a bit of the detail. Instead of looking at individual projects of 100 hectares, 1,000 hectares, 5,000 hectares, we should be looking at 100,000 hectares across a country and mapping out in a bit of detail what's required, who can help, because it's a lot of it's about replumbing, infrastructure that's been built historically, and then the country can understand the cash flow, the costs. Investment banks and groups can talk together about the same things, because usually investment banks and groups working in conservation don't speak the same language. And it allows also the discussion with communities, because this is a bit of a process, and it brings them on board. And it helps the private sector, because private sector does not have the money to think about 100 miles of coastline, engineering constraints, social stuff. So I would offer for thought that we need more of these early level setting activities to take place, which create an ability for the country to address its NDC and for other actors to work out where they may fit in the whole process, be they a development bank, be they philanthropy, or be they private sector. Just a consideration.
Okay, we can move on to the next question then.
Hola, buenos días. Y muchas gracias por sus exposiciones.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for the presentations. And one very important topic for this conference, and my question is for Diána. And I think that you mentioned in your presentation something about the carbon credits that could be recyclable in a way. Could you maybe expand a little bit about on that concept? This topic, that is something that you said in your presentation, and thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a misunderstanding. The credits are not recyclable, but what our funding is. So the Blue Catalyst Fund will give a grant funding that is recoverable, which means that once a project gets invested in by follow-on investors, at that point they need to repay us the grant into the fund, and that allows the fund itself to be recyclable. So that means that let's say we have $10 million of philanthropic funding in the beginning, we disperse that into cohorts, but since some of the projects who are successful in the end in attracting that follow-on funding are going to repay us, we're able to disperse that money again. And we're asking to be repaid with some sort of a multiple so that projects that are successful also compensate for the ones that fail. And this allows us to generate an evergreen funding vehicle that can support this type of catalytic de-risking for projects for many, many years to come.
Hola,
Hello.
Hola, ¿ya?
Hello.
Esta pregunta va para
Okay,
Adrián
this
Flores.
question goes for Adrián Flores.
Tú acabas de
Adrián,
mencionar
you
las
mentioned
que
just a
son
moment
las
ago
fuentes de financiamiento
that we need to get out of the
tradicionales.
traditional financing
Quisiera
funds, and I
saber,
would love to
hablando
know when we
este
talk
tema
about this
actual,
topic that is
¿qué pueden hacer
so
los proyectos?
relevant.
¿Cuál
What
es
kind
ese
of projects, or what
diferencial en
can
la
these
tesis de
projects do? What is the
evaluación del
differential
sector
in this
privado
value
que
proposition for the
invierte
private sector to be able to
en todos los
invest
proyectos de
in all these
conservación?
blue
¿Qué
carbon
podríamos,
projects? So
desde tu
what
experiencia,
could you tell us
contarnos?
from your experience?
Creo que no entendí.
I think maybe I didn't understand the question. Could you maybe
¿Cuál
reformulate
es
the
ese
question?
diferencial? O
What is
sea,
the
tú dices que hay que
differential?
dejar
What
las
you
fuentes de
say that you need
financiamiento
to
tradicionales, es
stop
decir,
using them
abarcar un
or
poco más el
use maybe
sector
some other
privado,
financial funds or
porque pues ya sabemos que
sources
siempre estamos
on the private sector, because we know that we are
financiando
asking
cooperación internacional,
financing from
filantropía.
philanthropy and
¿Cómo
international
hacemos
cooperation.
más
So how
atractivas
can we
estos
make these
proyectos de
projects more
carbono azul para
attractive,
que el
these blue
sector
carbon
privado
projects for the private sector to
invierta
be
en
able to
ellos?
invest in them?
Perfecto, gracias por la aclaración.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And yeah, I was taking a look at some recent publications from World Resources Institute about the finances for adaptation. And in these studies, they mentioned that $1 that is invested in adaptation and resiliency could more than $10, or there are also some other forums as Global Commission and Adaptation Forum that also do maybe showing the good things and the benefits of adaptation and resiliency that is naturally involving these blue carbon ecosystems is not necessarily any spending or not an expenditure. It's an investment that could bring benefits, and not only benefits in terms of damages that prevented, or damages or spending that is prevented. Is really about there is a lot of evidence that is showing that the investment in adaptation and therefore investment in these kind of ecosystems are really an opportunity for the private sector. And well, we know that the good things or the qualities of these kinds of ecosystems help us to mitigate many of the risks that the private sector is facing, a risk on that they may be exposed in many of the assets that they have, and also many of the consumers and others. And it's really about, well, if the projects could maybe going to a micro level, it's going to be more complicated. But if we could show what are the potentials or the potential benefits, and more than just the general analysis that I'm mentioning, I think it is going to be very valuable to motivate the private sector. And just to close with this question, from what you're telling us, well, from what we hear from the private sector, we require more than just creating the evidence. It's a series of enabling conditions that I also showed in my presentation that are required to be created to be able to then have, they need to be developed to be able to create this trust with this sector.
I just want to add something to it. So I think it's really important to use the right kind of tools and financing for that is fit for purpose. And today, the carbon finance is the most established mechanism, but it's not applicable in every context and on every site. So I think the approach can be to quickly do a feasibility assessment or a pre-feasibility even, just sense checking. Would a carbon project make sense in this case? Is that funding even applicable for us? If yes, great, because you have a mainstream funding mechanism that you can try and access. If not, you need to look for other funding mechanisms. And I do want to highlight 2 other initiatives when it comes to mangroves. TNC and CI launched a Blue Carbon Plus Challenge, looking into alternative business models that could exist in mangrove adjacent areas such as aquaculture, mud crab, and in some cases there could be a business case made to attract private capital to invest into these businesses and then link the health of those businesses with some kind of caveats that the nearby ecosystem needs to be protected and restored. So this could be an interesting opportunity. And then Mangrove Breakthrough, as mentioned, also is doing something similar, but they're looking at more at the country level, trying to set up bond mechanisms that could fund a series of activities that are into these adjacent mangrove positive businesses.
That's great. Can I just jump in as well and ask, in this feasibility assessment, how are, we talked yesterday about sea level rise and climate change risks of, you know, more intense storms in the future, changing hurricane patterns. How are these factors factored into the assessments at the feasibility stage?
Yeah, well, so this is a real issue, and especially if you're looking at the Caribbean region with the increasing severity of storms, hurricanes, and also sea level rise. The way the voluntary carbon market deals with it at the moment is that the level of that risk needs to be assessed and then a buffer pool set aside to mitigate risk. And so how does that look in practice is you need to allocate a certain percentage of the credits that you cannot sell as a project that becomes your buffer pool or security pool should such an event happen, and therefore the project's ability to produce and issue those credits become lower. It protects investors from that downside. And yes, this is a real risk. Unfortunately, you know, there's no quick solution around it. Mangroves are very vulnerable to these kind of climate events, and that makes them more risky investment compared to a terrestrial project. But maybe Steve would want to add to that. I see.
Yeah, this is a really good point, and there's a lot of things in here. It's, you know, the secret to a good project is climate adaptation planning, and then you put your mitigation project in that context, and so that provides confidence in the outcome. It's good practice for a project to think very conservatively about the risks of sea level rise. You know, so you think about how bad can it be, and you plan that way. Of course, there's a natural tendency for a project to go, oh, maybe it's not going to be that bad, and so my project's not so risky. And there are various risk tools. So the project might start thinking that way, and that might get past a validator. But when you come to the due diligence by a company, they're definitely going to be thinking about the risk side of it. And so if they consider you to be underestimating the risk, that's going to be a point of contention right at the very end of your process. And so it's probably in the benefit of the project to be quite conservative about assessing these risks at the beginning. And it may mean the project's not going to move forward. It's much better to do that than have a lot of investment go to waste. But fundamentally, again, back to the national scheme, the more you can think about these issues in the big picture of how the country's going to plan it, it makes the project a lot more resilient right now. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've got time for 2 more questions from the floor. 1 more question from the floor.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My name is Lucia Licero. I'm coming from SCI, Latin America. And I was just wondering with this discussion, how can we pitch these projects, like ideally, from the technical sense, how can we translate all of these scenarios and issues and constraints, but also positive things that come with these blue carbon projects to funders? What are your top 3 recommendations? Thank you.
Bueno, no sé si top 3.
Okay, I don't know if maybe top 3, but I'll give you 2. And I think that maybe reinforcing or maybe emphasizing a little bit more on what I mentioned about the opportunity that it represents to these kind of projects for society and the economy, the surrounding communities and their livelihoods. And I think that this is one of the things that I'll use, but how can you do this? And I think Diána also mentioned this, and this is also about the language. With these knowledge products that we share, and also the ones I put in my presentation, we try to provide or maybe offer a language that is common for different stakeholders, and many times we get lost in the translation and the terminology, and I think it is important to try to find these common grounds that allow us to communicate all these benefits and also the risk, because it's about transparency at the end of the day. And I think that the language and the common language will be a good thing, and also to be able to show the potential benefits and of these kinds of projects.
Yeah, well, I think that the main point with the blue carbon project and why it is still commanding a price premium and it's considered a higher quality project is because you create a solution that is a win-win-win. It's a win for climate adaptation and mitigation. It's a win for nature. Mangroves are biodiversity hotspots. 80% of global commercial fisheries depend on mangroves to be healthy for nursing grounds, and for coastal communities is an important source of livelihood. So if you frame it in this way, it's like these ecosystems are climate nature community champions. And unfortunately, the way that we have set up the funding mechanisms is that even just climate finance and nature finance is in a silo. It's separate. And we talk about them on the different COPs, we send different targets, but actually these should become more harmonized, and I think in the future they will become more integrated, so that we can look at the benefits, and we don't use the language co-benefit to carbon, but we can actually assess the value that it brings for all those different elements.
Great. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much. I think it's time.
Muchas gracias a los panelistas.
Okay, and thank you very much to the panelists and the moderator for this dynamic. And now,
pasar
okay, so before going to the lunch break, we're going to have a group photo with the 2 panelists and the moderator. And for the rest of the participants that are here in the auditorium with us, you can now move to the design area for the lunch break, where volunteers are also available to provide any kind of support. To the ones that are now online, we request that if you're now posting anything on LinkedIn, you can also tag us at Blue Carbon MRB and using the hashtag IBCWC 2025 so we can see and share your photos. We will reconvene after lunch for the next sessions, and very many of the ones that are as part of the practice community, there is a meeting in the auditorium in the other side of this room. Please go there and be there on that meeting.
Nos encontraremos.
We will reconvene after lunch at 1:45 p.m.